Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Game Changer. I'm Mariam Zia. Today we will delve into an important topic that has of course echoed in the corridors of power since the 60s. That is the global debate on countries' desire to dethrone US dollar in international trade. Of course, this discussion has been in the power corridors since the 60s, but it has gained little momentum. But with the rise of Brics and of course with the expansion of Brics, there are discussions among the countries to explore the options for an alternate currency that could be utilized for, of course, bilateral trade has already started between many countries, and now there are discussions for exploring alternate currency. In today's program, we will be exploring how feasible is this option. Of course, we know that during the 2007-2008 global economic crisis, the rationale for, of course, the power of US dollar and its hegemony has been under scrutiny, but it has gained little momentum. Now it is gaining momentum, and of course the sanctions on different countries has elaborated and of course expanded this debate. In today's program, we will be exploring Brics' role in this discussion and what are the alternate options, how feasible are these options, what challenges countries like Pakistan would be facing when we talk about the alternate currency options. To discuss this and more, we are joined in the studios by Dr. Usman Chauhan, who is economist. Welcome to the program. We're joined by Mr. Shahryar Khan, who is a commentator, political and international affairs. Welcome to the program. And we're joined online by Mr. Humayun Khan, who is also a commentator on political and international affairs. Welcome to the program. Dr. Chauhan, let me start with you. Of course, with the recent summit, 15th summit of Brics, and with the expansion of Brics, we know that 6 new countries are going to be joining Brics. There are a lot of discussions now around the financial cooperation among these member countries and of course to dethrone US dollar from the global economic trade. What's your take on all these discussions?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I tend to agree with you that this is a very important moment that resembles actually the spirit of the Bandung Conference. So even a bit further back in 1955, you had this idea that the colonial powers have had too large a stake in global affairs, and now the developing world has to work together. It was, as you correctly mentioned, under pause for a long time. And global trade still is largely conducted via the US dollar.
More than 80% is done in, of course.
Precisely, more than 80%. And at the root of all this is the relationship between the US dollar and energy, so the petrodollar trade, which means that you used to deal with most energy and commodity items through the US dollar, which meant that if you didn't have enough dollars, you would be in trouble. Now, BRICS countries find that since they are so large a component of GDP, combined, as well as virtually all of the growth that is expected in global GDP expansion over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Because they're emerging economies.
Because they're emerging economies. You're going to see a shift away from this. And it was previously done in a passive way, in a bilateral manner among countries, such as through swaps and other instruments that are one-to-one. But now you see entire architecture being built around this. And the foundation for this has been laid with an accelerated fervor since COVID-19, since the Russo-Ukrainian war, and particularly now you see that everybody is on the same page in the developing world that this is the way forward, especially as the West recedes in its economic productivity, in its economic scope, and in its economic influence.
Can you elaborate on some of the initiatives that Brics has taken to further the cause of de-dollarization?
Well, above all, there's the currency aspect to it, but then there's also a Brics bank. Then there's you can say underpinnings of bilateral agreements among them. There are exchanges taking place. There is the pooling of capital. So what you're seeing is that there's multiple different measures being taken so that you will not have the same amount of reliance on the US dollar. And in addition, these countries are trying to hold each other's currencies in larger larger percentages of reserves.
Of course.
So for example,
local currencies being used for bilateral trade.
Correct. Local currencies being used for trade. And so you have, for example, a third of Russia's reserves are in renminbi, for example, and the Brazilian real, even the South African rand, all of these currencies occupy now significant portions of regional trade in their areas. So the real being in South America and South African rand for the Southern African region, they are occupying an increased portion of the denomination of trade happening there.
Of course. So, Shahriyar, what's your take on the challenges that are associated with the de-dollarization and how BRICS countries are planning to address those challenges? And do you expect some ripple effect on the global level as well?
So, Mariam, when we basically discuss this current or the recent drive towards de-dollarization and this like whole discussion that is like emerging again, as Dr. Chauhan has like basically describe most of the macroeconomic variables that basically push towards this. But I would want to look at it from more of a geopolitical angle. But now a lot of like countries, especially the developing ones, which have like a very large and growing GDP and like trade footprint in the global trade arena, they're basically seeing that Washington has basically over-relied on using the dollar as a means or tools of foreign policy, and basically pushing the developing countries into their agenda or what the geopolitical implications of any decision are. So this is something that we observed when the Russian-Ukrainian war took place, and the global sanctions that were basically put on Russian companies, Russian individuals, Russian groups, that basically gave a signal to the developing countries that if there is a geopolitical event, this dollar can be used against them as a tool of foreign policy.
And even before that, when we look at Iran, that is another example. So in your opinion, how does this this perception of US dollar and even euro has evolved over time, and how now the mostly the global south is realizing that it can be used as of course as a tool for foreign policy as well, how it has evolved over time since the 50s or 60s?
So as you mentioned, the Iranian JCPOA, that agreement, that was basically unilaterally the US moved out of it as soon as President Trump came out.
Yes.
So that was also a signal that a lot of like international agreements are also dependent on geopolitical dynamics. So when these developing countries are like developing their like trade relations, now we see that after this like global move of like sanctions against Russia, Russia moved its like alliance more towards the Chinese camp. And now we see that even in 2023, Russia and China's trade volume exceeded $200 billion. And this is like what the other developing countries are also saying, that if they have a reliance on oil, and if they have to deal in, as Dr. Saud said, petrodollars, they would, they're like now developing currency swap agreements, or they're like trading in their own currencies as well. So we also have another example in which UAE basically gave a huge, I think like 65,000 tons of LNG to China, and that whole transaction was done in Chinese yuan. And these are the moves that a lot of like developing countries are like taking. Other than that, the prevalence or the arrival of the cryptocurrency, the blockchain movement, that is also giving an alternative pathway to these developing countries. And President Lula of Brazil also came up with this idea.
We will be talking more about the digital currency and what alternates are available for these countries who are looking for these alternate options. But Mr. Humayun, let's talk about the BRICS alliance. And of course, since the BRICS has expanded, can you tell us some of the achievements in the area of financial cooperation among the big BRICS bloc?
Thank you, Mariam. I guess I'll take it from where Dr. Chauhan and Shahriyar was talking about. This is something which, as in your introduction, you've already said that has been happening in 1960s and 70s. But the momentum gain in terms of de-dollarization of international financial institutions at the same time, what Shahriyar was referring to, the global geopolitics, where the dollar was the predominant, not only the dollar, but international financial institution was also dollar-based as well. So they're like two things. One, dollar was the reserve currency of the entire world. And second, US being a predominant power in the world has its geopolitical implication for anybody who ever says one thing or another. So now there are like a couple of things which needs to be taken into account. Brics is probably the only big organization in terms of the countries which were involved in this. And now with the expansion of or 5 more countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, and probably there's another one as
Argentina.
well. UAE.
Yes. UAE.
They are one of the most important countries in terms of the oil producing countries, in terms of the global trade, which is happening in these countries, economic hub in Middle East. So this is a very significant move. And it was President Putin in the last meeting of the BRICS in August. He was the only, by the way, the leader who mentioned this particular concept of de-dollarization. Now, it should be taken into account in different ways that the world is changing very drastically. At one time, there's United States of America with its allies in the West and in the South and all over the world. And on the other hand, there are emerging blocs, which is China, which is Russia, which is Brazil, which is South Africa, which is India. Now, in that mix, there's a lot of complexities. Even though that we think that de-dollarization will happen, but there are a lot of caveats. The caveats are the entire international financial institution, and you have said it in your introduction, 80% plus of the trade. And I think it's not 80, it's basically more than 85 to 90%. So it's like almost everything is deal in terms of dollar, and in terms of financial institution, it's IMF, it's Asian Development Bank, it's many other institutions. So we need to be very careful, though that this drive has never gained that much momentum as it has in August when BRICS had its final summit. But things will not change very quickly because there are many factors. There are many countries,
we will be exploring those challenges as well that these countries, of course, need to navigate to move towards a de-dollarization. But Dr. Chauhan, we see that the trade among BRICS nations is projected to exceed more than 500, of course, billion in 2024. What kind of agreements or trade agreements are needed or will be used by these BRICS alliances, of course, members, to reach this potential?
This is an excellent question, because when you look at the relation between BRICS countries, they're not particularly symmetrical.
Of course.
So, for example, the bilateral trade between China and India is $150 billion. You hear that often, but what you don't hear is that 120 billion of that is Chinese exports. Only 30 billion is Indian exports. It's a very asymmetric relationship, and that's why India is very suspicious of this general BRICS architecture, which it is a part of, but it doesn't find that it has a coalition within there, because when it is in this room with the other BRICS countries, it is in the shadow of China.
Of course, but Dr. Chauhan, there's another factor as well that you mentioned about the asymmetrical relations amongst the members, but there is asymmetrical relations with US as well.
Yes.
Of course, a lot of countries have, a lot of a huge agreement deals with US, while other doesn't have. So there is divergence of interests as well. How do you factor these elements in moving towards a de-dollarization? How important is that factor?
What you're saying is absolutely right. So among the new members that are joining BRICS, as well as the old members, each of them has a different relationship to the dollar, and each of them has a different trade balance in US dollars. So China has a very large trade surplus, but South Africa, for example, does not have a large trade surplus. Brazil also is a net importer except for commodities. So because the structures of their economies are all different, the value that they put on dollar trade is different. China, for example, does not need as many dollars as it has 3 trillion reserves, so it wants to diversify. Russia is worried about the weaponization that Shahryar Saab and Humayun Saab talked about, so it has already gone into things like gold and renminbi. The same is true for Brazil, where it doesn't have it has fallen into a middle income trap. So it has one rich tier of society, but then the rest of it is impoverished or disprivileged. So it has to reconcile those economic structures before it can proceed. The same is true for South Africa. There's one other thing in this you should consider, is that the US's opinion about this is also very mixed.
Of course, yes.
Because some people think that this is a very bad thing as Trump supporters, for example, because it is the fall of empire. So we are falling down. So we are weak now. Look at what's happened to the world. We're not the same as we used to be. But at the same time, the price of maintaining dollar hegemony has been very high for America. It has been called the exorbitant privilege for decades, dating to the 50s. Because if you have the dollar as the instrument being used around the world, then you have to print more dollars than you actually need. So you'll be in a permanent deficit with the rest of the world.
That is an important factor to consider. But Dr. Chauhan, when we look at BRICS Alliance ambition to move towards de-dollarization, how does their approach that they are, aiming to adopt is different from the previous approaches or from the traditional models since the 55, of course, you mentioned earlier as well?
Absolutely. There's two parts to it. One is the psychological element, one is the technical element. The technical element includes opening up vehicles that didn't exist before, such as swap agreements, which means that there's enough of a line of credit to draw upon that is serviced and processed through their banks, so trade can happen. That's the technical side. The psychological side is that you signal that actually these things matter to our economy. We want them to be traded in our currency. So China will say that I will pay you for your soybeans in Argentina, but we'll do it in yuan. Or it'll say, I'll buy this oil from you, as Shahryar Saab mentioned, from the UAE, but the trade has to be done in yuan, that kind of thing. So there's a psychological element that both parties in the bilateral trade agree that this is the vehicle through which things are done because it is reliable enough.
And what challenges, in your opinion, might emerge from adopting these kind of approaches?
There are some macroeconomic challenges that emerge from this. For example, these currencies are not always either free-floating or they are not reliable. So for example, the Brazilian real fluctuates quite a bit, same with the South African rand. The second is that the Russian ruble is not liquid as a currency. And the fourth is that the yuan is kept within a specific bandwidth. They have been accused of being currency manipulators in the extent that since they have such a large trade surplus, their currency should appreciate, but it isn't allowed to appreciate. So they constantly generate a surplus at the expense of their trading partners. So each of these currencies does not enjoy the same liquid, freely floating nature that the euro or the dollar or the yen or the Swiss franc or the pound do. So that is a factor.
There's a lot of factors that we need to consider. So Mr. Shahryar, in your opinion, how this is going to be impacting the global economic policies? Of course, we know that BRICS alliance, after its expansion, makes more than half of the world's population. But do you think this is going to be translating into something that could change the global financial system?
So Mariam, historically when BRICS
or
came
even
into
policies for that matter.
So historically when BRICS came into being, it was viewed as an anti-West alliance. And a lot of Western countries were viewing it as such when it comes to the EU and the US. But now, another important thing is due to happen in January 2024. That's the Saudi Arabia and UAE joining this bloc. Yes. So I think this will have
and
a lot of...
Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman also mentioned that BRICS should not be viewed as an anti-Western or anti-US alliance.
So up till now, we've just been discussing trade relations and economic relations and how currency swap agreements will be taking place. But once the UAE and the Saudis basically join this alliance, there's another dimension that comes into play. That is the security arrangements that a lot of these countries in the Middle East and the developing countries have with the US. So most of the relations are not only economic, they also have geopolitical implications because of the dynamics in which those countries operate. And when we look at UAE, when we look at Saudi Arabia, they have historical security arrangements with the US as well. Other than that, most of their oil trade is done with the European Union or with the Western countries. Even now, with the expansion of the BRICS, the Saudi and the UAE, they are looking at Southeast Asia as alternative markets to get their reliance off the Western world and move more towards Southeast Asia as well. They're seeing the expansion of Singapore, they're seeing expansion of South Korea, and they basically see that these are the markets in which they could also go and basically invest or diversify their reliance as well. So this changing geopolitical scenario in the world will also have implications. And when it comes to the expansion of BRICS, as soon as the Saudis and the UAE join in, then I think like most of this impetus would be diluted as well, because Saudi would not want this like de-dollarization drive to go in that like speed, or they would like have a long-term view on how this basically goes forward.
And all these countries are going to be joining in January 2024.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Mr. Humayun, we see that there is a decrease in, of course, the US dollar's share in Russia and China trade volume as well. We see that it has decreased from 90% in 2015 to almost less than 50% in 2020. Do you think this is a temporary shift triggered by the geopolitical conditions or environment, or do you think this could be translated into something that is long term?
Mariam, the line that we are treading right now in terms of the concept of de-dollarization, it's very important, it's very complex, and it's very futuristic at the same time. The entire world is shifting, and the tectonic plates are shifting in many ways, but there is this cardinal principle that United States of America, international financial institution, and the European and the Western model are going to prevail in the next couple of years. God knows how long they can prevail, but now on the other hand, it's basically Russia which is taking this drive, by the way, of de-dollarization. There are like 17,000 sanctions on them post 2020. So now we need to see this. The international system, and I think it boils down to China and United States of America in future. The entire debate that we're talking about, the countries that you have mentioned, I'm not saying that they're not important, but in a way, it's basically what the Chinese and the US will decide amongst each other, depending upon their trade disagreement, depending upon the geopolitical ambition, depending upon what is happening in the entire world. That is going to shape the world. Coming back to this question, it's very important, you know, the entire 80% of the international financial institution is based on US. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran. Now, the geopolitical dynamics which are happening, China with its global security initiative have helped Saudi Arabia and Iran with the political rapprochement. This is a huge, significant development which has never happened in the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years. So that's a very important development. But at the same time, the international institution is so much entrenched in the dollar that it cannot happen. For example, Dr.
Right.
Let's take the Chinese foreign currency reserve, $3 trillion, $3 trillion, and the word dollar is very important. So they have dollars. In order to have it into yuan, that will take a long time. And your question is very important in a sense that, you know, how these BRICS countries will change. Right now, what they're changing is in terms of barter trade. There's no one currency they're mentioning. They're talking about ruble, they're talking about yuan, they're talking about Singaporean currency, they're talking about Indian rupee, they're talking about many other currencies. But if there is no unanimous decision that in order to change dollar into another currency, I think this is, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, it's like a futile exercise in the near future, but it will change in the longer term.
Right. Let me take the same point to you, Dr. Chauhan, that of course we have seen in the recent past that the trade, bilateral trade is mostly of course the volume has decreased, especially when we look at Russia and China, from almost 90% to less than 50%. How significant is this shift? And of course, what is the significance of these swap agreements when we talk about countries like China, Russia, and others?
For the moment, the absolute value of these swap agreements is not particularly large. They come into the billions, but not tens of billions in scope. But the symbolic value is enormous because you are suddenly getting the inklings that there can be a new possible system. So there was the technical side, which is not so large for now, but it will become very large. and the psychological side, which has already had a huge impact.
So how important is this recent agreement, swap agreement between China and Saudi Arabia of $6.93 billion?
That is not a huge amount in realistic terms, but it is symbolically very powerful because it means that instead of having the petrodollar as the base of the global trade system, you now have a petro-yuan possibility. You actually can have, for example, third parties, other countries using the yuan to pay for things, right? So then you can develop an entire architecture based around credit and around trade with China rather than using dollars. For example, do we really need US dollars because we trade with America so much? We don't actually trade with America so much. They are our largest export partner, it's true, but it's not specifically for America that we need it. It's because a large percent of our energy is imported, about 30%, and that has to be paid for in dollars. So we're taking a far-flung country like the United States using its currency to trade with something that is just across the Persian Gulf from us. That is the problem. If something far away permeates, insinuates itself into local economies. That is really what is at stake now.
Of course, but Dr. Chauhan, we have witnessed, of course, that since the 1960s there has been desire to dethrone the dollar. But do you think this is these countries are going to be taking some concrete steps to, of course, move towards that ultimate goal?
Absolutely. The currency swaps are just the first step. Then you have digital currencies, then you have new banks, then you have new financial institutions, new credit arrangements. So you have multiple steps that basically follow the pattern that the US post-Bretton Woods implemented. And to be honest with you, the strongest desire to dethrone the dollar does not come from the developing world, actually came from Europe. The French franc and the Deutschmark were very, very passionate. People like Charles de Gaulle, they were very passionate about having the US dethroned. And in fact, the gold to US fixed rate that used to exist prior to 1971, that was actually dethroned in large part because France was not buying into the system. Yes. So the US said, fine, this is the end of it, right? So the gold standard and other arrangements have existed. They have had pluses and minuses. Future trading or currency or other economic arrangements will also have pluses and minuses. The important thing is that we in Pakistan are ready for such shifts, that we are agile and that we can leverage changes and tectonic shifts to our advantage.
But Dr. Chauhan, how feasible is it for governments like Pakistan to move towards alternate global currency, because we know that we have economic challenges at the moment, and we have issues of foreign reserves as well in US dollars. So is it feasible for countries like Pakistan to shift towards this alternate global currency?
Absolutely. In fact, I would argue that it is more important for us to do it than for other countries, because other countries may have a stake in the existing system. They may not necessarily be pushed to make such radical changes, but countries like Pakistan that ride the waves of global trends set by institutions far, far away in Washington or in Frankfurt or Brussels, it's very important for us to be ready to leverage these things. And because our economy is in a state of transition, we have a strong demographic potential, we have a lot of room to cultivate and to arrive at an optimized productivity level. For us to take advantage of these things is actually more important than for people with stakes in the traditional system.
Right. And Sharyar, in your opinion, what steps do Pakistan need to take to move efficiently towards this, of course, alternate global currency? And of course, we know that Pakistan has already applied, and Pakistan wishes to join Brics as well.
So Pakistan can take a lead and take direction from how the Brics countries are basically taking this forward, because it's a bloc of developing countries. They're doing well in terms of increasing their GDP, and their global trade footprint is increasing. So what are the methodologies that they're using? And I'll take the lead from what Dr. Chauhan basically said. Right now, Brics countries, even within their own internal trade structures, they're making more bilateral agreements in their own respective currencies as well. So this is the first step. Then when it comes to the currency swap agreements, it's a financial tool that have been used previously as well. But now I also see the deregulated currencies and digital currencies. And even President Lula from Brazil, he also suggested that the Brics bloc should also come up with their own cryptocurrency that can be used as a measure of trade as well. Other than that, there were discussions that China is also...
Do you think that this Brics digital currency could challenge the existing economic order?
The only advantage that a blockchain currency basically gives is also one of its weakness. The fact that it's very deregulated. So you don't really know who basically controls it. That is why there are like a lot of like Western countries that are moving towards some sort of like regulation in that. So what risks that are associated with like blockchain currencies are that they're not very reliable. You know, their volume or their trade or their value is very mercurial, I would like say. So a lot of like countries, when they want to develop a reliance over them, they're like very careful because of the risks associated to them. That is why they're like developing their own cryptocurrencies. China is like working on it. The Brics, they will be discussing developing their own currency, whether it will be a hard currency or like a cryptocurrency, that's like yet to be seen. So these are like some of the measures that the Brics countries are taking. When it comes to Pakistan, Pakistan also historically, if you look at our trade patterns, even if you see our reliance on GCC countries in terms of like importing oil, which is like one of our largest like commodities in our financial bills, it's a bilateral agreement between Saudi and Pakistan. And it's like very different from what Saudi presents to the rest of the world. So Pakistan also needs to make more of these like bilateral agreements, which are in some way benefiting Pakistan, and then like see where the whole like global architecture of the financial architecture is moving. One good thing, and it's also a bit of a challenge as well, Pakistan doesn't have a large footprint when it comes to the international financial markets. Pakistan is not entangled into the whole global economic system as well. So moving Pakistan's reliance from the systems would be easier, I would like basically.
Right, and Mr. Humayun, in your opinion, what are the potential benefits and also the challenges associated with moving towards this native digital currency?
Mariam, this is very important in two aspects. One, the entire world is shifting towards artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and then another angle which we didn't discuss much in our topic today, the alternative energy sources, because the last century was about fossil fuel, where we have OPEC countries, where we have oil and gas. But now the world is moving toward an alternative energy source, and every century has a different source of energy. Hypothetically speaking, and this is like for future generation and people to decipher, let's assume that something changes in the next few years, that we don't need oil and gas as much as we need now. We have artificial intelligence, which is deciding about our daily life. And by the way, this is a very potent reality. It's not like something which I'm just telling you as a dream. Hypothetically speaking, if this happens, the entire dynamics of the world international financial institution will change. And in that aspect, the only two countries which matters is United States of America and People's Republic of China, because they are the most powerful competing nation at this point in time. One holding the international financial institution, the other holding chip war, other holding resources of alternative energy, electric vehicles, solar panels. So I think Pakistan had to tread very carefully, because we have relationship with both of them, and we need to maintain relationship with both of them.
And how you view the importance and significance of course, Brics alliance in all this, of moving towards global alternate currency, and also the financial cooperation amongst the members. And of course, another factor is the voice of global South as well in all this argument.
You know, it's very, very, very important. Brics is one of the most important emerging organizations. The members are very, very important. Some of them are very close to Pakistan, barring India. Other than that, I think once we add ourselves into an international agreement,
Alliance
organizational structure, alliance or bloc, it gives us certain benefit, and then it also gives us certain, not
leverage.
necessarily leverage, but no, not leverage, but we have certain obligations as well. But I think Pakistan, if and when we get to join that, we will gain from it in terms of expanding our existing structure. Because as Shahyar was mentioning, we are not as adapt to the international world as rest of the developing countries. So it will take some time. But at the same time, it is one of the most important areas where Pakistan would have a diplomatic clout. If we join that, we will have a lot of leverage there. But my argument was slightly different. My argument is we need to be a bridge between the United States of America and China because we are friends with both of them and we can benefit from both of them. And we need to learn from some of our historical predecessors or enemies who have gained in terms of non-aligned movement and other, where they were part of both the worlds. So I think China has extremely well maintained a great relationship with Pakistan, and so is United States of America. So if we could merge them and benefit from them, that's going to be a recipe for success for Pakistan in the coming years.
Of course, in terms of foreign policy, that is very important. But given the complexities of all this issue and surrounding discussion regarding de-dollarization and Brics alliance, and what kind of strategies should countries like Pakistan apply or implement to move effectively towards de-dollarization that could benefit our own economy as well?
It's an excellent question. The best way to approach this for a country like ours is to see what we require specifically, rather than...
And what we require, in your opinion?
For example, we require energy, because we're an energy importing country. So one way is to shift from fossil fuels. As Humayun Saab was saying, you have hydro, you have solar, you have so many, you're so well endowed as a country, go to that. And the second is to have deals where you aren't reliant on the US dollar specifically to import energy such as LNG or petroleum. So that energy is one thing we require. The second is because we are, in my argument, overpopulated, you need an export market for labor, to export labor. That means that you have to have investment in your people. That doesn't mean necessarily local investment, but also foreign investment to come and train people so that they go abroad. Brics can be a great avenue. For example, why is it that you and I are conversing in English instead of Chinese or Portuguese or Russian? These things are possible, but how many Pakistanis do you know who speak Portuguese? I do. So the fact is that you have to be ready for these markets and engage and have a people-to-people connection. We often in Pakistan put the onus on our government because our government is large, but that doesn't cover the whole spectrum. A lot of the engagement that happens between BRIC countries is happening private to private, large companies. It's only complicated in the situation of China because they have state-owned enterprises, so the public and private are connected. But in other places, it's people reaching out to people. And so the responsibility is not just on us to ask our government to do things, but our people need to be ready for the new world. Because of colonialism, our mindset gravitates towards London and Washington automatically, but these are not particularly important economic capitals anymore. Sao Paulo is important, Johannesburg is important, Peking, Shanghai. We have to look towards these places, have communities there, have trade deals. This is a strategy to really materialize BRICS, not just have MOUs.
Of course, but considering the geopolitical rifts within the BRICS members, what would be the challenges when we talk about the coordinated efforts moving towards de-dollarization?
Well, but the argument we are coming at is that it's decentralized. Blockchain is decentralized. There's no specific authority. America is not an authority anymore. So the fact is that we have to take initiatives left, right, and center, so long as they do not undermine our national interests. But most of the economic agreements we're talking about wouldn't do so. The thing is we're expanding the scope and adding options, adding more cards to our sleeve to play later. So the idea is that if you are engaging with China, we really should be ready to engage commercially with China, but how much market research have we done on what Chinese people really want? And the other thing is, how much do we know about South Africa? We talk about engaging with Africa, but actually understanding Africa is a different thing. So it requires a knowledge base, it requires
proper
a sense...
market research.
Absolutely, absolutely market research and a sense of initiative. So our imagination needs to be bigger than just visiting London on a foreign trip or Washington. That's an imagination is required.
Right, and lastly, briefly, how do you see the future of this de-dollarization and, of course, the efforts? Your concluding remarks on all this.
This is a long-term project, I see. Like the seeds of de-dollarization are being sown right now, but it's like still I see it's a bit far when it actually comes to reality. And I agree with Dr. Chauhan. In the meanwhile, Pakistan needs to make its human resource more productive. We have to like move more towards just like providing labor into providing more technical resource. We need to invest more in IT services, like the leading global technologies, and obviously exporting other human resource which is like technically capable to the Middle East or wherever this like need is there. When it comes to Pakistan joining the BRICS, it will still be a very political decision. Let's see what India does. It is a veto member when it comes to BRICS. Other than that, China and Russia are supporting Pakistan's membership.
Right,
so we'll have to
course.
see how that goes forward as well.
Of course. Thank you very much, Mr. Shahriyar Khan, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Usman Chauhan, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Mr. Humayun Khan, for joining us in today's program. Of course, in today's program, we explored the complexities surrounding the issue of de-dollarization. Of course, BRICS countries are planning to move towards this alternate currency, but how feasible is this alternate financial system? Only time will tell us. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Take care. Allah Hafiz.